Okay, welcome everybody to the first session of the Scintillating Science of Logic. My name is Mark, otherwise known online as Spirit Man, and I will be teaching you something quite profound as the days unfold in such a way that it could help our species overcome some of the greatest existential threats we've ever faced, but also will help you in your personal life in all areas once you're able to grasp this type of thinking that we're going to call speculative thought. So you can see above, our layout has a drawing, and it has Hegel's Science of Logic on the top. We're going to call these sessions the Scintillating Science of Logic because it is quite scintillating, and we're going to be teaching it in terms of these Metamodes on the side here in the colors. So to make it easier for you to see, I will hide the chats and make it easier for us to interact with the graphic. So we're going to try and expose the material in terms of 5 interpretations that traditionally happen when anybody reads this philosopher G.W.F. Hegel, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel, a German idealist philosopher that isn't as well known as Nietzsche, Plato, Aristotle, and the other greats, but is regarded as having the greatest impact on humanity, particularly in modern times, and has influenced great global movements from Kierkegaard and him starting what's called analytic philosophy now, or Marx and the communist movement, or Sartre in terms of all his Nobel Prize in terms of rejecting dialectic that Hegel uses. So these metamodes are just ways to understand the words. There's art as the first mode, then there's the religious perspective, then there's abstract philosophy, then there's abstract science, and then there's genuine wisdom, which we'll leave in white. And you can see here that contemporary traditions of understanding Hegel can be organized in terms of these metamodes as well. So one of the most prominent scholars in Hegel is Zizek, Slavoj Zizek. And in his abstract form, and abstract means a kind of truncated form, Zizek focuses a lot on art, and he has some interesting videos on demonstrating dialectical or speculative concepts using art, film, things like this in regards to ideology. Then we have the right Hegelians, which are the more traditional religious Hegelians that interpret Hegel in a more Christian religious frame because he identified as a Lutheran. Then we have our left Hegelians. They are the ones that are the opposite of right Hegelians in terms of thinking that Hegel did not believe in God, was not religious, he was faking it, and was really introducing science. And this is where Marx comes in with a man named Feuerbach and Engels, and they tried to show that these other modes were lesser modes, but this was the ultimate mode. In truth, though, they were performing an abstract kind of science, and this is where concrete Zizek might be in terms of upgrading older philosophies, abstract philosophies such as Aristotle, Plato. It's a higher development, you could say, than maybe just right or artistic Hegelian scholarship. And then we have finally the 5th mode, which is what we're introducing, which is New World Spirit, a new interpretation based off of a universal context that's been missing in Hegel since his death at the age of 61 in 1831. So over 200 years ago, no one has truly understood Hegel, and some of his famous last words were that he took time to explain his philosophy in full to somebody, and not even they understood him. No one understood him. So let's begin here with the actual text. This is Hegel's magnum opus, or one of them. He didn't write very many because his writing was very dense and very cogent. But the linchpin of his system has not been fully understood because it's so difficult to understand this new way of thought that nobody knows where to really begin. Hegel said that it starts with the phenomenology of spirit. This book he wrote in a rushed manner because his funders were pushing him to finally publish something. He was 36, 37. He was living off the last of his inheritance money. All of his other colleagues were famous by this point, publishing many articles, and he still hadn't produced anything except a couple of newspaper or journal articles on Schelling's philosophy and other people's philosophy. But the science of logic is where the beginning of his system starts. The phenomenology of spirit is a Socratic masterclass, a primer to teach ordinary thought that it doesn't know what it thinks it knows. Even the most basic words, even the most basic concepts like time, space, consciousness, perception, all of these things that we think we know, we actually don't know much about at all. And so it's a frustrating lesson if you stay in the phenomenology, because the words are moving with a universal kind of logic that he says up front is happening behind the back of consciousness before it arrives on the scene. And this behind the scenes of consciousness development is the science of logic. The true introduction to the system, if you're curious, is actually Hegel's History of Philosophy, where he shows history itself developing this science in a deeper way than even modern science, but that each philosopher in history was a crucial element, a crucial player in birthing the pure form of spirit's consciousness or wisdom, which is what he calls the science of logic. So we're not going to waste too much time. You can see I have a couple of graphics to help demonstrate some of the concepts. They're tricky because they flip back and forth. The reason why we're going to teach this now and for free, at least at this point, is because we're running an experiment on how this will help change the world and how it will be taken up and who will take it up. So we're going to run a couple of sessions like this in this format to see if it breaks through the traditional linear interpretation of Hegel, which has prevented the true power to change the world, has prevented the spirit from coming out when we desperately need it in the current age. You're facing tremendous amounts of problems. We have what we're calling a mega crisis. It's a meta crisis, compounding with a poly crisis. The meta crisis is the heart of the issue. It's a cultural problem globally where our communication is breaking down, trust is breaking down, and cooperation is breaking down when we need to accelerate it more than ever, because we have roughly 200 of what are called universals that are creating contradictions or tensions that are ripping us apart. And those 200 are what we need to heal, or what Hegel calls sublate. And that word we'll be using a lot in these readings. Once we solve the meta crisis, we can cooperate in a higher spirit to solve the poly crisis. These are more material problems. And in the form of urgency, or in the order of urgency, we have the artificial intelligence crisis, or if you haven't heard about the troubles there, we need to have an artificial intelligence categorizing in this science of logic that Hegel's talking about, and not in our current contemporary models. Then there's something called CRISPR. That's genetic editing. If you haven't heard about it, please look into it. There's also the world wars. They're all escalating at the moment, sadly, and this can create a universal diplomacy. And we also have the climate crisis, which there's a lot of debate about what's causing it. People disagree on why it's happening, but most people agree that it is happening, even through their own anecdotal experience. There are things changing in environments that we can now see after decades are not normal. And then the last crisis in the poly crisis is the mental health one, where loneliness is at epidemic levels. 1 in 2 people, according to the Surgeon General, is lonely. We have a lot of external connection through social media, but not a lot of internal humanizing or spirited connection. There's anxiety and depression going up, suicides are high, opiate addictions are very high, and they're suspecting full-on reality collapse, or some kind of collective psychosis might start taking hold as artificial intelligence starts to cause reality collapse because we don't know it's real. It's already producing photorealistic videos and many other things that are going to accelerate here in the next few months. So we're going to release the true power of the word. These words are not organized in an ordinary way. Hegel is using a wakefulness that eludes ordinary consciousness. Buddhism calls it non-dualism. It's enlightened thinking. You can call it divine thinking. You can call it presuppositionless logic. You can call it many things, but it's really just truth and objectivity. But to our way of thinking, it looks backwards at first, not because Hegel's backwards or unclear, but because we are. We're the ones inverted, and we're projecting being, the beingness of the words, their meanings, incorrectly. So this is a little bit of a briefing on why Hegel hasn't been understood in so long, despite some of the greatest minds in history trying to tackle him. This book, The Science of Logic, is regarded as the most difficult text ever written by a human being. And that's saying something, because even the ancient philosophers like Aristotle were already writing in a way that we still can't understand properly today. But luckily, Hegel broke through and has reinterpreted them also in this universal context. And so we're going to read the most difficult text ever written by a human being together, paragraph by paragraph, and I'm going to show how it's being misinterpreted across these 5 modes. So when we read a sentence together, I'm going to highlight it in a way that I think somebody in one of these consciousnesses will pick up on it, but maybe in the wrong way. They'll get fragments. So if you read Hegel long enough, you'll start to get this weird feeling that it's very simple, but also incomprehensibly complex. You'll start to feel like he's saying something that agrees with you, but something that also disagrees with you. You'll feel like you're getting something, and a couple of sentences later, it will completely reverse. It's very topsy-turvy. You think you grasp it, and then all of a sudden the rug is pulled up from underneath you, and you're a flag in the wind. It's very confusing at first, because these modes of consciousness are interpreting it at different levels. And Hegel is changing his cadence to try and break you, to shake you out of that dead consciousness, that dead state of mind, that dead kind of logic that we're teaching in universities today. He literally calls it the dead bones of logic. And he's going to quicken them and rejuvenate them into this more living form, this organic form, which of course our environmentalists might be heartened to hear. It seems to align with more what we would call maybe indigenous wisdom or ecological wisdom, how nature itself works. But what we're talking about here is the nature of nature, and it's very important that we address this now in this comprehensive way, because many other scholars are going to look at this once it starts to go around, and once we start to perfect the form, and we'll be making improvements to the pedagogy as we go. But there's so much happening in the world that we're innovating as we go and perfecting as we go. So there'll be a lot of debate on whether this is the true Hegel, and what I'm about to teach you is what is missing in terms of the capital T truth of Hegel, which satisfies all of these modes. They're all vindicated. All of them have limits, but when you know how to look at limits in a sublative way, they harmonize and belong together in a reasonable, flowing, sense-making whole. And that is peace. That is goodness. That is what we're looking for in terms of the highest good and service that any community, any government, any economy can produce for human beings collectively and individually. So let's give it a shot. We're going to test it out today. We won't go for the full session. We'll just see how this resonates. And we'll just go through the first paragraph or two here, we'll see, and try the highlighting and see if it helps you get into the material in this deeper way and break through the limits of the contemporary scholarship. And if you're on the document has a Google link, so it's an interactive document. So if you're in the sessions, if you look in the comments to the video, the link to this document will be there. And in future sessions, when I when I post it ahead of time, you can log in here and you can actually highlight certain words that you want to make comments on. So let's say you want to know something about philosophic thought in Germany. You can highlight this, and even though we're in a Google document, you can go to comment, and I'll see your comment. What is the philosophy in Germany? If I can type philosophy in Germany around this time. And you just click comment, and it will sit here, and it will hover so that when we're ready to go over it, I can address it in a way that's relevant to everybody else as we're flowing together. And don't be afraid to ask any questions. Once I answer it, I can just select it and it will disappear. And then we can just keep going through. So as this becomes more and more widespread, you can even join me on the screen and actually ask questions personally in the chat. There's another chat in the actual Google Meet. So feel free to join there as well. So yes, very interactive. We want people to understand this. Having self-determining freedom is the goal. Genuine freedom is the highest goal. And it feels like flow states. It feels like timelessness, or what Hegel calls eternal time. We're transcending temporal time because you're reacquainting yourself with the true being of the words, the true isness. And it also feels like complete immersion. Once you start to understand the content becomes you in a certain way where it affects your form. And form and content interchange. You start to realize that you're completely immersed in what you're doing, and the object and the subject are one. It's very enjoyable when you do it the right way. And the third criterion, or the third feeling of a true experience of what Hegel's trying to galvanize in you, is a sense of intrinsic enjoyment. So when you read Hegel on your own, you'll have a universal experience with everybody else who's tried to tackle this Mount Everest of enlightenment. You will experience tremendous amount of cognitive dissonance and pain because the words seem to be out of order and they seem to be jumbled or scraping against each other in your mind. And it's incredibly draining because it takes a lot of sugar in the mind to process cognitive dissonance because the neurons are rewiring and there's a lot of pain at first. But what we're going to try and do is bring the flowing nature of reason, genuine reason, not rationalization, which is ordinary reason. That's painful and it causes conflicts in those 200 different inner contradictions. This brings them into harmony and flows. So let's try and give it a shot here and transform the experience of Hegel into this flowing higher spirit of the word and all 5 of these modes. So you might identify with 1 or 2 or maybe 3, but very, very few people identify with genuine wisdom, which is how Hegel means these words to be understood. And there's multiple layers. So let's see how it goes for us today. Let us begin the launching of a new world spirit through the power of these words. Paragraph 1. The complete transformation which philosophical thought in Germany has undergone in the last 25 years, and the higher standpoint reached by spirit in its awareness of itself, have had but little influence as yet on the structure of logic. How much of that did you grasp? Let's read it again. The complete transformation which philosophical thought in Germany has undergone in the last 25 years. So when somebody sees philosophical thought, they usually immediately run to abstract philosophy. Usually we think of Plato, Aristotle, maybe even Kant, maybe some of these older mentalities or modalities. So we will highlight this first paragraph in this teal color, which of course, because we're experimenting, of course there's going to be a learning curve with this. So give me a second. The technology is lagging because we're running quite a few things. So let's highlight this in terms of abstract philosophy. And abstract philosophy is like a super sensuous understanding of the universe. And there's this distinction Hegel makes between sensuousness and supersensuousness. Just think of sensuousness as your five senses: taste, touch, sound, sight, all of these. And supersensuousness is pure thought. It's like your inner eye. It's your sixth sense, your mind's eye, just pure thought. And so philosophy is an attempt to upgrade our understanding into the supersensuous, into pure thought. But at first it's fragmented. Even Aristotle, who tried to systematize, and Plato, who tried to systematize the realm of forms and these pure thoughts, had them in fragments. They didn't create a full system. So that's why we call it abstract philosophy. It's an earlier kind of form of philosophy. So when somebody in more ordinary consciousness reads the sentence, they're thinking most likely in terms of this type of philosophy. So the complete transformation which philosophical thought in Germany has undergone in the last 25 years. In truth, what had happened in Germany was that Kant and Schelling and Fichte and these German idealists had really created profound changes that was shaking the foundations of ideology at that time. So Hegel's really talking about Kant and these other philosophers of his time, and he's disagreeing with what they're doing. There's something that they're doing is not actually transforming as deeply as he thinks it should be transforming the world. So let's do the next sentence. And the higher standpoint reached by spirit in its awareness of itself. So when somebody sees the word spirit, they're usually thinking in, of course, religious consciousness. So you can already start to see why there's differences in interpretation and why it's very topsy-turvy, because it seems like he's moving from science into its opposite mode within the same sentence. So it really jars the mind, because it starts jumping around. The mind knows that he's jumping around, but it doesn't know how it's jumping around. And then to finish it off, he says, in the last 25 years, have had but little influence as yet on the structure of logic. And of course, when we see structure and logic, these words are what we normally associate with science or even modern science. Even though Aristotle in abstract philosophy was the first to birth it thousands of years ago, in modern parlance, we would normally associate this with predicate logic or computer logic or things of this kind. So you can start to see we have three different layers of interpretation of the same paragraph. And this is why there's so much disagreement on Hegel, is that he's using these words in a supercoherence, is what we're going to call it. There's an inner dynamic, an inner meaning to these words that is missing from how ordinary consciousness is thinking about them. And this innerness and this outerness is very important. It's a crucial, what's called a dialectic or a duality or a polarity, if you want to talk about it that way. It's just two things in opposition. Ordinary consciousness is associated with externality. You're outside the words and you're looking at them on their surface appearance, right? So you're interpreting them in these modes in an abstract way. But there's an inner dynamic that's connecting them across those modes. And that's what you're sensing when you're reading him, as this nonsensicalness of him turning words into their opposites or using them in juxtaposition in what feels like sophism. It feels like trickery. It feels like he's playing a joke on you. But that's how cosmic consciousness, that's how divine truth, that's how infinite science feels. It's like a cosmic giggle. It's a playfulness as the speculative nature of the word generates itself. It moves itself through what's called inner contradiction. This is all unusual language. It's hyper nuanced language. We're sort of sloppy in the way that ordinary consciousness uses the words, uses symbols, uses science. We're evolving into higher expressions of knowing, explicit knowing. We have implicit knowing, we have intuition, animals have animal instinct. We know in the mode of beingness, but the whole point is to upgrade this to the mode of thinkingness. And thinking from the truth makes true thought or reason. But in other words, it could be called spirit as well. True thinking is a higher form of thinking. So what I'm going to try and demonstrate to you is this inner meaning, this inner dynamic that's threading between these, which is missed because these metamodes are fighting with each other so bad. And that's why they all think they're right 200 years later, because you can read Hegel for thousands of hours, and if you can't break out of your ego or out of your limit, then you can't grasp the true universality. This is a universal logic, and each one of these metamodes is operating in what's called a particular logic, or even an individual logic in your own special version of it. So it's hyper customized. So let's read this in the way that Hegel means it, in terms of genuine wisdom. So the complete transformation which philosophical thought in Germany has undergone in the last 25 years, so we mean Kant and Fichte and Schelling, and the higher standpoint reached by spirit in its awareness of itself. So here, spirit could mean religious consciousness, but spirit is a moving target. Spirit is growing. So there's something called abstract spirit, or early spirit. It's like a seed. All true knowledge, all true things move like nature, like a growing organism. It has life to it. So it starts with a seed, and then it grows into a youth, and then an adolescent, and then into a mature adult, and then into old age. So these words are doing the same thing. So the way that Hegel is using the word spirit here is in a kind of early mode of it. It is not super early, because the developments that he's talking about of those last 25 years are what he regards as actual progress, even though it doesn't reach real concrete wisdom like his philosophy claims to do, or like what he claims to do in his philosophy. But it's not like we're back in Aristotle's time. It's an advance. And we're saying that spirit is higher than consciousness. Consciousness is what we would call abstract spirit. It's like an early form. It's like the seed of it that's going to develop into self-consciousness, and then into universal self-consciousness, which then becomes reason. But reason at first also has to grow into higher forms. Or you can have different degrees of reason. The highest degree of reason is something that he calls absolute spirit, which is really genuine philosophy. But genuine philosophy is often not thought of as genuine wisdom. It's usually thought of in abstract philosophy or abstract science or religion or arts. It's thought of in these modes, and they're blending in conflations rather than clarity. If you do Hegel's speculative logic in the right way, you're going to see opposites happening at the same time in the right way. The right logic, the wayfulness, is what makes it into either clarity, right way, or confusion. Same words can give you different experiences if you don't understand that wayfulness, that inner dynamic. So Hegel is speaking about philosophical thought in Germany, yes, in this abstract philosophical mode, but he's also talking about it in terms of this abstract science. So really, what he's talking about here, in terms of Kant and Fichte, they have transcended, or they've begun to transcend the old metaphysics, and they're transforming it into this more rigorous, clear, objective, empirical kind of philosophy that we now know as modern science. So really, he's defining it more in Metamode number 4, and not how external ordinary consciousness would immediately interpret it as maybe this more metaphysical interpretation, which seems to be more useless than empirical science. But if you do know a bit about Germany or Prussia at the time, then you probably would have understood that Kant meant it in this way. But I'm going by the ordinary reader who might not have all this background. So hopefully now we have the more experienced philosophers also agreeing with this interpretation, that really we should have this as the first sentence and how Hegel means it. And in the second sentence, Hegel means this also in terms of these last two modes. In fact, he doesn't really mean it so much in this. It's about the emerging to genuine wisdom with him. He's the one ushering in an even higher standpoint. So at the moment, the spirit, even though it sounds religious, Hegel is using it in a scientific mode. And spirit can also be interpreted as mind. In German, it's called Geist, and Geist has a nice speculative, a dual meaning to it, where it can be mind or the more religious kind of Holy Spirit. So he lets you choose, depending on your meta mode, which one is comfortable with you, so you identify with what he's trying to write. So he's giving you a little bit of a bone to get through this and identify. What you don't identify with creates that cognitive dissonance, and it's an othering. And it's like, my enemy, I don't like that, I don't understand it. And our minds want to understand. They're sense-making organs, you could say. So this should also be in this blue. And then in the last one, have had but little influence as yet on the structure of logic. And so what he means by logic here is not the dead logic of abstract science. What he means by logic here is genuine wisdom. He means real logic, universal logic. So we should really have this last blue in terms of this white. So you can see how when people first read this in external consciousness, they're not grasping how Hegel really means it. This paragraph actually looks like this. Everything that we didn't think was blue, or actually let's do it this way, it's easier for people to understand. Let's format paint this. Everything that we didn't think was this deeper abstract scientific blue actually is. And then what we thought was real science or abstract science isn't. Oops, you can start to see my computer's lagging a little bit. So let's highlight this in terms of how Hegel means it, which is pure and clear in itself. So the reason why we're not going to highlight this is because in true thought, more like how children might think before they have all this abstract knowledge in their minds, this is what nature really is like. This is how the laws of the universe actually operate. We are the ones that abstract, just like Kant was showing. We have a backwards way of thinking. And we're going to correct that now for the first time. So I hope this makes sense to you. This is the real way that Hegel means it in terms of the Metamodes and how to understand it. But the words are packed. You can interpret them in any of these modes, right, or close to it. And so we're going to try and go through the whole system a little bit faster. I'm going to try and have better tools here so I can highlight a little bit quicker. But you get the idea of why this reading is universal. We're showing the form and how to read him in the wrong form and in the right form, and how to interpret the content in the right context. So hopefully this creates a new kind of scholarship around Hegel that unites the left and the right Hegelians. It makes sense of Zizek, that rapscallion. He is one of the ones that's the closest to the true Hegel, and can start making affirmative claims on the true power of this way of thinking. And I took my time here, but as we get more experience, we'll go faster and faster, and we'll start to answer more and more questions as we have more people coming in here. So thank you for dealing with me and my technical difficulties as I'm learning how to navigate this process and figuring out what colors we should use and all that kind of stuff. So I hope you found this powerful if you are scholarship or in scholarship, and if you're concerned about the world and it doesn't seem like this kind of knowledge can change things. It does. It changes you in being and thinking and allows you to transcend or access this sublation, which is the movement of the essence of wisdom itself. So this is how we get into operating the world in a practical way, but also a grounded theoretical way that's missing even at the highest levels of academia today. Okay, that was an interesting test run. Thank you, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. We're going to try and have these at the same time every day as they improve, and maybe we'll do a second round of these with better tools where we'll have it more structured and have some other examples. But thank you for tuning in. Until tomorrow, keep sublating. Peace.